This is Paul Schmid. Welcome to the Pursuit Zone. Sarah Winters Papsun has figured out how to travel while helping others, and that skill has brought her to nearly every continent and to 40 countries. In January of 2010, Sarah traveled to Africa to climb with the 3 Peaks 3 Weeks Challenge team. The goal was to climb Mount Kenya, Mount Meru, and Mount Kilimanjaro to support, encourage, and raise awareness for grassroots community organizations in Kenya and Tanzania that are focused on health, environment, and educational development. You can learn more about the challenge at 3peaks3weeks.wordpress.com. Sarah Winters Papsun, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thanks for inviting me to be on the Pursuit Zone.
Sarah, what sparked your desire to travel?
Well, ever since I've been a small child, my parents were always advocates for traveling. We didn't have a lot of money, but we always figured out a way to do a vacation pretty cheap, even if it was to get, like me and my brother and my cousins, in the back of our station wagon or our Astra van and do a cross-country trip and do peanut butter sandwiches and stop at grocery stores and stay at cheap hotels or camp. We always found a way to make a trip, even if it was something like a 3-hour radius from your house. Like, I live in Connecticut as a kid growing up, so even just a trip to New York City or Boston could be quite an adventure, or driving to Florida or California. My parents always found ways to make the dollar go and to travel, and so they really instilled in me that love for adventure, meeting new people, and culture.
What was your first sort of big travel trip on your own?
When I was in college, I guess, for the first time, I went to Ireland with Quinnipiac University. They had a program over the break where you could get college courses to do like an intersession. And so I took that opportunity to travel to Ireland. I knew a couple people that were going through Quinnipiac, but I got to meet some really amazing people on that trip. And my parents were in full support of that, go over there, do the study abroad thing. It was a great opportunity to also connect with part of my roots. My grandmother is Irish, so it was neat to see a place where our family was from.
Now, I also read that you went to semester at sea.
That's right. When I was at Quinnipiac University, I first did that Ireland trip on my own. And then when I was a junior in the spring of 2002, I traveled on a boat for 100 days through the Institute of Shipboard Education's Semester at Sea program. The Semester at Sea voyage is different every year. It's a floating ship, so it goes to different ports. It has different professors. It has different students on there, so no experience would ever be the same. It's quite an amazing way to see the world and get college credits, and I'd strongly recommend it to anyone. Just Google Semester at Sea, and it comes right up.
Yeah, I'd never heard of it before, so I thought, they must not have had this when I was in college.
And the other thing is you can go on it at any time. So even if you're not currently a college student, you can go on and audit the classes as an adult passenger. There's usually about 20 to 40 people that do that, and they call them seniors at sea. And they don't have to take the classes if they don't want to, but in fact, usually they're the first ones there with a pencil, and sometimes they're adding more life than the students. It's wonderful to see people up. We had a guy on our trip that was in his 80s that had been on semester at sea 2 or 3 times, and he came back for another voyage.
Wow, that's cool. I'll have to check that out. Maybe when I retire, I can do a semester at sea.
You can also get paid to do it. If you wanted to go on as an employee of Semester at Sea and work in the bookshop or the independent studies office, or if you have master's degrees and you can teach a course on the ship, you could actually get paid to travel the world.
Wow, that's good to know.
I know. It's a great program, so I strongly recommend looking into Semester at Sea.
For your semester at sea, where were you? What part of the world were you at?
So you literally, on mine, it was the spring of 2002, we literally ran around the world in 100 days. We started in the Bahamas, and then we went to Havana, Cuba, which was such an amazing experience as an American to get to go to Cuba legally. To go to Cuba, there's a trade embargo for U.S. citizens. You have to have prior permission for either humanitarian purpose, scientific research, education purpose. So, ours was an educational purpose. We docked in Havana. We got to actually meet Fidel Castro. He sometimes invites the semester at sea kids kids to hear him speak, and he did do that for us in the spring of 2002. And he spoke Spanish and English and Russian, and he was exactly what you thought he would have looked like. He had the military fatigues and the beard, and he served us, food and salsa dancing. I mean, I can't even believe sometimes the stuff that I got to do on that ship. After Cuba, we went to Brazil. It was carnival time. We ported in downtown Salvador, and every day there were parades and people in the streets celebrating. And then I took a small independent trip up to the Amazon and went down where the two rivers meet. And then after Brazil, we went to South Africa. And we had like a week in Cape Town. And if you wanted, you could fly and do safaris. I stayed in Cape Town. I did something called sandboarding, where you hike up sand dunes and ride a snowboard down the dunes. I hiked Table Mountain. I also went on like a little mini safari and saw the penguins at Boulder Beach and got to see the southernmost light there. It's so crazy the amount of stuff you can do so quickly. From Cape Town, we were supposed to go to Mombasa, Kenya, but there was a political problem. So for every semester at sea port, there's a ghost port. So our ghost port was Mauritius. So we ported in this little island off the coast of kind of Madagascar in Western Africa, near the Seychelles and the Isle of Réunion. And so, we went to Mauritius. It was kind of like around the spring break time for most college kids. Most kids are going to, Daytona Beach or Cancun. And here we are like in this beautiful French honeymoon island of Mauritius. And in French, they call it the Ile de Saint-Maurice. And so, it was just gorgeous. Mark Twain had been there, and he had wrote, Mauritius is delicious. And it truly was. The influence of the foods there. It's French, it's African, and a lot of people from India as well. So you have this great blend of 3 different cultures in the food. Then from Mauritius, we went to India, and I ported in the port city of Madras. And then from there, I took a 23-hour train ride to the tip of Kerala, which is the southernmost part of India, and kind of did like a temples and tea picking tour where you could learn all about the spices and the teas and the ceremonies that they have. And then from India, I went to Singapore. Again, we were supposed to go to another port. We were supposed to go to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. But again, there was some political instability, so the ghost port was Singapore City, Singapore. And then from there, we went to Hong Kong, and we had 2 days there. And then you could get back on the boat and go up to Shanghai, or you could fly. So we flew and had time in both Shanghai and Beijing, doing the Great Wall of China and the Silk Road and all the markets and seeing some of the pre-Olympic buildings starting. And then from there, we went to Osaka, Japan, and had a week there doing, again, like more temples. And I did more rural stuff in Japan. I did like Nara, Kyoto, and Osaka. Some people opted to go up to Tokyo and take the Japan Rail around, but by that point I was pretty tired and out of money. And then from Japan we crossed the Pacific Ocean, which takes a little longer than a week. And we went up kind of by the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, down the coast of Vancouver, and ported in Seattle, Washington, literally 100 days after we had left Nassau, Bahamas. So, it was quite a whirlwind trip.
Wow, I'd say so.
Yeah.
Man, that's a great experience.
I know. And to be 21 and just, a college student, and it really opened my eyes to how kind people are in the world and how most people really are interested in helping you and finding out where you're from and want to know what it's like where you live. And a smile really means a smile, and a thank you really means thank you. It's just beautiful, the amount of people and things that you got to experience in that 100 days.
Now, how did you come to get connected with the 3 Peaks 3 Weeks Challenge?
Yeah, this is a great story. So I didn't have a television, and my brother came to visit me, and he wanted to watch a sports game, and I sent him across the street to a Japanese restaurant that had a TV. And when he came back after the game, he said, "Tomorrow you're going to get a delivery from Radio Shack. I've ordered you a TV on the internet." So I got a TV, and the first television show that I watched was this documentary of 3 Peaks, 3 Weeks. Every year they send a group of women from all over the world to Africa. It's usually about 12 women to hike 3 of the highest peaks in 3 weeks. So it's an annual challenge that the Peaks Foundation puts on. They do a lot of other peaks. They've expanded, so now they have adventures in South America and in Asia. But when they first started, it was all about East Africa, and they still do that annual trip. So if anyone is listening and they're interested in that, just know that that happens every January, a group of women hiking for charities and inspiring women in East Africa. But I was so attracted to the project because, as I was saying, on semester at sea, I was supposed to go to Kenya, and that was one of the ports that had a political problems. So on my, bucket list was always to go back to East Africa, to Kenya, to Tanzania, to see Mount Kilimanjaro. And so when I saw that documentary and I saw, oh my gosh, you could hike huge mountains, get to help charities at the same time, and just be kind of in this like-minded group of women hiking. Because usually when I go on ski trips or hiking trips, I'm like the token slow girl with all these guys. So I was so attracted to the project that, we'd all be hiking at the same time, when we have to go to the bathroom at the same time, when that we can share each other's clothes and pack. I was just so thankful to be kind of in this collective with women hiking and to inspire women in East Africa, because living in the United States, women's rights are pretty amazing here. There's still always room to go, but it inspires people that are living in developing and emerging worlds to see strong, independent women making choices on their own, and that really helps influence them to see people doing that.
So what's the process? I mean, how did you get to go?
Yeah, so once I saw the documentary, I started writing stuff down frivolously and did a couple internet searches, and I found the application for the Peaks Foundation on their website. And around that same time, I also found out through their website that one of the charities, the School of St. Jude, had their deputy director in New York City, and she was going to be speaking at Rotary Club in New York City like the next day. So I literally just called up the Rotary Club of Metro New York City and said, could I come to your dinner and hear this woman speak? And I did, and I got to speak with her afterwards. And it's like when doors start opening, Paul, you just have to walk through them. Like to see that documentary, to see on the website that someone from this school that I could potentially be fundraising for was in New York, which is like less than an hour from my house, to actually meet her and see the pictures, hear the stories of what, I could possibly be doing in East Africa, just really sparked something in my soul. So I said, even if I don't get the 3 Peaks 3 weeks, I'll still find a way to go to that School of St. Jude and do a long-term project there, if it was for a week or 3 weeks, where you can do all kinds of stuff. You can rebuild libraries, you can read with kids, you can fundraise, you can plant trees, you can do mentoring. There's a million things you could do at the School of St. Jude. And it was just lucky enough that I did fill out the 3 Peaks application. I went through the interview process. I was selected, and I got to dream big. So I'm really glad that I did.
And how many women are selected?
12. So it just depends every year how many they get. It could range. I think the year that I did it, which was 2010, I think it was out of a group of 50. So yeah, you never know.
Are you still friends with any of those women?
Yes. And it's so cool because of Facebook. I'm friends with all of those women and our guides and our porters and some of the people from the charity group. So the due diligence has been wonderful. Like I can check every day what's up at the School of St. Jude, what's going on at the Laikipia Wildlife Reserve, what's going on with SIC, which is Support for International Change, like how the community leaders are, how many AIDS tests they've been able to do last month, what kind of upcoming programs each of them are doing. It really makes it so personal when people still ask me like 3 years later, how are those people in Africa that you helped? Do you still keep in touch with the students at the School of St. Jude? And I can say, yeah, I see them every day on Facebook. I get their newsletters emailed quarterly. I sponsor a student there, so we write letters back and forth and exchange pictures, and I get his report cards. And it makes it so valuable that I got to see that stuff firsthand. I'm still an advocate for all 3 of those charities. And, keeping in touch with people makes the experience so much more special, because you went through something very special with these people. You spent a month in Africa hiking really tall mountains. It was a challenge, seeing these charities doing such amazing work, something so different from your normal everyday life in the United States. Like I work in an office, so I have a little cube and I type at a computer every day. And to see people doing something like making aloe on a farm, or seeing a rhinoceros and making a fence so the people on the one side of the fence can keep their gardens safe from the rhinoceros, and on the other side, this endangered rhinoceros can stay safe from people attacking it. I saw so many things that were so different from my everyday life that it was quite an amazing experience.
So what are the logistics like? I mean, what's your flight like to get to Nairobi?
So my flight was on frequent flyer miles, and I had to call American Airlines and British Airways every day and begged if they had anything with that amount of miles. And one day they finally found a flight. I think I called 30 times, and it was on New Year's Eve, and it had a huge layover. So I flew New York to London, and I got to London on New Year's Eve, and I had a day in London. So I got to spend New Year's there, which was pretty neat. The next day I flew out, and I had to go London to Nairobi. And again, I had a large layover in Nairobi, and then Nairobi to the little airport of Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. So it literally takes 24 hours to get to East Africa, and it is a long journey. It's time in the airplane. You just want to sleep, and it's well, by the time you get there, you feel like you've already hiked 3 peaks.
And what do you have to bring with you? Do they support? How much logistical support do they provide on the ground, or do you have to bring all your gear?
So you bring most of your gear. The way that any kind of outfit would be to hike Mount Kilimanjaro is you can't just do that by yourself. You need to hire a crew of people. So like you can't just go in there and say, hey, I'm a single person. I want to like hike to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. You have to go through a tour agency. So the tour agency is going to provide the guide and the cooks and the chefs and the porters, and they'll carry up the cooking equipment, the food, the tents for like the community tents where they kind of set up a tent and everyone can fit in there with a table, and then the individual sleeping tents. Now, there's all kinds of varieties of price points for this. I know some people have told me I've heard that they've hiked Mount Kilimanjaro, for a couple $100s, and they went in with like one guide and one chef, and they carried a lot more of their gear. And I think you truly can do that. Most people really want to support the local travel agencies and support the guides and the porters. These people know the mountains. They've lived there their whole life. They're experts, and you want to give them fair wages, and they can show you a wonderful trip. So we did that route, and I would definitely say go with the tour agencies that really spare no expense, that bring the medical supplies in case you start suffering from altitude sickness and you start to get something called pulmonary edema where your brain swells and your lungs can fill. You want to have guides. You don't want to scrimp and save and take the $100 or $200 guides when you could possibly die in these mountains. You want to support the people that are properly trained, that have radios, they even carry guns on these mountains. There's wild animals, and sometimes they'll yell a word, they'll yell Chini, and you have to get down. There's buffalo, and there's all kinds of wild animals that could come and potentially hurt you. So logistically, the tour agents will carry most of the gear that is food related and tent related. And then you would carry on your back every day, probably a pack that's about 15 pounds that would have the water you're going to consume for the day, your rain gear, because at any time it could rain, and then things like that would be close to you, like your camera, your passport, maybe some of your personal snacks that you'd really want to have in case you didn't feel well that night for dinner, medicines that you might be prescribed, anything that you couldn't bear to part with. And then you could hire an additional porter to carry a second bag that might have in it, a couple of changes of clothes, additional snacks, maybe a spare pair of boots or a sleeping bag, something that, you just couldn't fit in your day pack that you'd be hiking with.
Yeah, I was surprised until I was researching this for this interview. I didn't know much about Mount Kilimanjaro and what it took to get up there. So I was surprised that it was a 7-day trip for you guys. Is that correct?
That's correct. Most people hike Mount Kilimanjaro in 7 days, and the way that the porters and the guides do this is they acclimatize you. The peak of Mount Kilimanjaro is 19,341 feet. And when you go from, a lower altitude up to such a high peak, you can't just straight run that. I mean, people that live in that area that are used to doing that all the time can. But most of the tourists that come to hike Mount Kilimanjaro come from places of sea level, or even if they come from places of altitude, like if they lived at 14,000 feet, they're still having to go from 14,000 feet up to 19,000 feet. When you fly into Nairobi, you're like around Colorado kind of altitude, like 14,000 feet. So even just gaining that, you have to do it properly. So the guides would walk you during the day really high, and then they'd bring you right back low to sleep. And then the next day a little higher, and then a little more to sleep, and then higher again, and then a little more to sleep. So every day over that week of hiking, you're getting used to your, working your body with less oxygen. And then the night that you're going to summit Mount Kilimanjaro, they make you go to bed like right after dinner. They serve you dinner at maybe like 4 or 5 o'clock. And after dinner, they just tell you, go to your tent, even though it's daylight, just lay down and rest. And we're going to wake you up at like midnight or 1 a.m. You're going to put on your headlamps and you're going to start walking, and you'll be at the peak of Mount Kilimanjaro for the sunrise. And I'll tell you, I never will forget that. You see the curvature of the earth. You're walking in the dark and the cold, and they're singing these beautiful like Swahili songs. And then all of a sudden you stop, and like the little glimpse of the sun starts coming over the horizon, and it starts getting bigger and bigger. And then once the sun rises, it warms your back and your body, and you're just so thankful that you summited Mount Kilimanjaro, that you walk from the top of Mount Kilimanjaro down to the base in a couple hours. So, it took you 6 days to hike to the top of it, and you descend it in like half an afternoon. So it shows you they do that long 6-day hike to get your body ready for it. They do say there's racers that will hike up Mount Kilimanjaro like as an endurance race, people that live there and train for it. And it's like the fastest up and the fastest down. And people do it in a day. I don't remember what the time is, but it's definitely like something insane. And it's mostly people that are the porters. I mean, every day they do that. Their body's used to working at less oxygen. And so for them to start at the base and run up and run down in a day, it's challenging, but they're used to it. People that would try to do that without training, you could definitely have that pulmonary edema and die. It wouldn't be worth it.
How is it for you, altitude sickness-wise?
I feel so blessed. I never got sick at all on that three peaks, 3 weeks challenge. Not one peak was I ever sick. I never had even like travel sickness. I was so thankful. I ate what the locals served me. Most of the stuff was hot foods like boiled soups and rices and meats. I really tried to stay away from like thin-skinned fruits like strawberries, apples, lettuce. I always just tried to eat things that were cooked really thoroughly or came like, as a watermelon or banana, something that was a thick-skinned fruit. So I was very thankful that I did not get sick. But we passed a lot of people on the trail that were sick, and I saw a couple people that looked like Weekend at Bernie's. They had their sunglasses on, they had their arms out, they had a porter or a guide on each side, kind of step by step, like bumbling along with their legs. And, most good guide companies every morning will take your pulse and they will monitor your heart. They put a little thing on your finger that tells you what your heart rate is and how much oxygen is in your blood. And if anyone at any time is telling the porter, telling the guides that they have severe headaches, that they're dehydrated, that they feel, woozy, that, if their numbers look strange because they're writing down your numbers every day, they'll make you turn around and go back, or they'll keep you at that altitude and your group will go on. There's no reason to try to push yourself to do that. There's people that try to hike it 2 or 3 times and you can do it. At any time, our guides always said, if something doesn't seem right or feel right, like just stay at this altitude, give it a little bit. You can always meet up with your team the next day, or you just descend, because when you start descending, you feel better and better. Sometimes little things, your guides can even give you pointers like just drink more water, even if you don't feel thirsty. The water really helps, going to bed early. They always say people that are not drinking and not smoking, that truly helps when you're at altitude. So I was just very thankful I never felt ill. The most I maybe suffered was a headache some mornings because it's just so high, but that was the least of the concerns.
Sarah, what were the weather conditions like for you when you were there?
Wow, we had a lot of different conditions. So the first day we started hiking in Kenya, on Mount Kenya, it snowed. And I thought, oh my gosh, is this going to be how it is for the next 3 weeks, like every day walking in the snow? And it was really cold. And when we got into our tents at the end of the night, they gave us like Nalgene bottles that were filled with boiling water so we could put them at our feet and keep our little sleeping bags and bodies warm. The next day we woke up and there was snow on the ground and we started walking and that snow turned to downpouring rain. And I thought, oh my gosh, is this how it's going to be at the end? 3 weeks of walking in the rain. And sometimes you absolutely need the rain to see the rainbows, because after having the first day of snow and the second day of rain, and then the rest of the trip, we really had fabulous weather. We truly appreciated that great weather because we knew what it was like to walk for 8 hours in this cold and snow, and to truly walk with like an umbrella on a hiking path because you're just so wet to the bone that you think that will help. So we did have a couple days that were kind of challenging with the weather, but most of the days were really nice and sunny. And when you hike Mount Kilimanjaro, you go through lots of different zones. So the first day of hiking, you could wear like shorts and a tank top, and you're seeing like giraffes and zebras and monkeys and all kinds of birds. And then, the next day you hike and it starts to get a little colder. You kind of walk through a little bit of the rainforest up to kind of like a rock zone where it's just kind of like walking on these craggly rocks. And then you get up higher and you're like, seeing glaciers and snow. So really you have to pack for all seasons.
Tell me the story of this I Believe bandana.
Yeah, so when I was applying for the 3 Peaks 3 Weeks process, and once I got selected, we started having these conference calls. I found out a year before that I was going. So they give you a whole year to fundraise and train for this big endeavor. So I have some college friends that I went to Quinnipiac University with that started this company called I Believe. And a lot of them were former athletes that had played Division I sports in college. And they were psychology, marketing, medical students. And they always believed that they would win. And so they did all this research and testing that, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe that you're going to get to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, you're going to do it. If you believe you can, stop biting your nails, you're going to do it. If you believe you're going to, fail, you're going to fail. Like, it's just whatever you put in your mind, that's what's going to happen. And so they came up with this idea to kind of support my trip. They said, well, would it be great if we gave you some donation money and if we also gave you a bandana? And they were calling it a Band-Aid. So if maybe had a really challenging day or someone really shined on the mountain, every night when we got together for dinner, we'd say something we were like thankful for. And the person that we thought shined the most that day, we voted to have the bandana. One of our guides got the bandana because he was heroic. He stayed behind with people and helped them and was carrying extra people's stuff. And then one of our guides then gave the bandana to another girl on the team who, was selfless. And she stayed back with someone who was walking slower than herself. Like, it was such a great team building tool, and it just complimented people for their character. And it was something you'd wear proudly when you got that to wear for the day.
Now, when I discovered the story about you, it not only talked about your travels and all the places that you've been, but the techniques that you use around fundraising so that you can raise money for charities while you're doing these adventures that you do. So
right.
Can you kind of elaborate on some tips for people of what they can do to fundraise for their own adventures and for their charities?
Sure. So one thing I always think about when I'm doing a trip is there some way I can use an advantage of the trip to help others? So for instance, I just went to Peru over Thanksgiving, and the trip to go to Peru was to hike Machu Picchu. And I happened to think, well, maybe I could do something with the 2 free bags that I put under the airplane, because I actually was just going to bring a carry-on bag, just bring a very small amount of stuff. And my aunt and uncle, who are really big charity endorsers, they said, use those 2 free bags, fill them to the gills, see if there's a project you can connect with locally, and bring down like toothbrushes and toothpaste and Band-Aids and underpants and bras and stickers and Matchbox cars and barrettes, things you could give to people in need. So I belong to a club called the Rotary Club International, and it just so happens that the Rotary Club of Greenwich, Connecticut has a sister club in Lima, Peru. And so like when I was saying, when doors open, just walk through them. So sometimes the Rotary of Lima, Peru would send people up to Greenwich, and I had met some of those people, and I reached out to them and said, I'm coming to Peru to do the Inca Trail, but I'm going to have some time in Lima, and I have 2 free bags that I could put anything in under the plane. And I was traveling with my cousin, so he'd have 2 free bags. So together we'd have 4 bags, which would be 200 pounds of donated goods from the United States. What would you guys like? And they in Peru are doing a biosand water filter project with Rotary. So people in rural parts of Lima in their homes have no running water, but companies will come and deliver to them river water. And usually that river water has runoff from animal waste or human waste, sometimes chemicals. And so people used to be all day trying to boil water, and it wouldn't alleviate all the viruses and the bacteria in the water. But for about $80, Rotary International is partnering with people to do these biosand water filters. And it changes people's lives. For $80, you see they get this, it looks like a little sink. It's a concrete square in their house, and it has different levels. It has a layer of sand, and it has a layer of gravel, and it has a little bacteria plate that is plastic. And these bacteria interact with the river water, kind of like yogurt, like the good and the bad bacteria intermix, and then the good bacteria always win, and the water goes through several more layers of all these rocks and sand and gravel, and through through gravity, the water then forces itself back up a tube and it pours out into kind of like one of those big orange Gatorade containers. So people can get 2 of those massive buckets of water every day for clean drinking water, for cooking, for washing, for their animals, for their children, for their life. And when we saw these people and talked to them and we said, what do you do now with all this free time? They used to always be worried about like schlepping this water and boiling this water. Now they're like, oh, we can just be like you. We can just, live our normal lives. We can read to our children. We can have spare time. And it was wonderful to see that stuff firsthand. And the Rotary Club said now that these people have clean water, they'd like toothbrushes and soap and toothpaste and dental floss. And so we were so happy to go to these homes, see the biosand water filters, and deliver some of these medical products from the States. And the Rotary Club of Greenwich and my ski club, the Ski Bears of Norwalk, Connecticut, were so kind in helping me fill these suitcases because, like I said, I had 100 pounds of stuff that I brought down there in 2 like roll-on kind of hockey-sized duffel bags under the airplane. And when you do something like that, originally, you do it because you just want to help people. And then once you get that feeling of like what it's like to truly help people, you just get so addicted to it. You just want to help more people and you want to interact with more people and see how people live and hear their stories. They're so interesting and I'm interested in them and they're interested in me. And it was so cool to share this experience with my cousin. It was the first time he had kind of done kind of like a charity or a mission project. And I just saw his eyes light up and he was so excited to see the kids. He's like, I want to go back and see those kids again and play with them. And I just think when you share things like that, those experiences, they don't cost very much, but they make such a difference in your life. And sometimes you have bad days and you think back to some of the experiences you've done where you help people, and it just makes you find purpose on, your purpose on the planet.
Tell me the story of why a French rock band is named after you.
So this goes back to Quinnipiac University. When I was a student there, we had some exchange students that came from France. And one of them, his name is Guillaume, he was always very animated. And he actually was in this Mr. Quinnipiac contest, and he could play the guitar, and he could sing and dance and act. And everyone always, was so enamored by Guillaume. He was so interesting to watch and to do. And so when he finally graduated with his MBA from Quinnipiac, he went back to France and he got a proper job where he worked in an office, and it was a great job. He traveled all over the world and he was making a ton of money, but his heart was not in, working in corporate settings. His heart was performing. And so he left his really amazing corporate job and he took on a couple of different projects. And one is the name of me. It's the Sarah W. Papsun Band. He plays the drums in this band. They kind of sound a little bit like Coldplay or Franz Ferdinand or even Chris Cornell a little bit. Their voice is really something different. They didn't actually ask me to name the band after me. I found it because a friend of mine had joined a social networking site called MySpace at the time, and she had called and said, "Oh, I saw you. You joined MySpace. You moved to France, and you're living in Paris now." And I said, "No, I'm still in Connecticut." And so I logged on to MySpace, and my jaw hit the table. I was like, "Oh, there's another person in the world named Sarah W. Papsun. She lives in Paris. I would love to meet her." And then I started clicking on some of the pictures, and I said, "Oh, Guillaume." So I called him. I said, "Do you want to tell me something?" He's like, "Oh, Sarah, it wasn't my choice. The band, we voted." I was always really good about writing Guillaume and all my friends postcards from all the places I've traveled in the world. And he had them all littered over his refrigerator. And they called me their little American correspondent because I was always writing these really fun and quirky postcards. And so I've been to France. I've seen the band live in Montmartre, and I follow them on Facebook. And I'm really proud that they're such a cool, funky, eclectic band, and that they named themselves after me. And one day if they get to be the Rolling Stones, maybe we'll talk about some royalties. But for now, I'm just flattered. And some of the members of Ernadette or of Sarah W. Papsun are also in a band called Ernadette, which is it's kind of like a band that plays air instruments, and they sing into hairbrushes and they jump around. So it's a really creative group of people that are involved in this project. And if you Google Sarah W. Papsun Band or Ernadette, they're doing the air guitar championships, and they have quite a lot of performances they do around Paris and Europe.
Sarah, what's next for you?
Well, I'm going on a cruise at Easter to Belize, Honduras, Mexico, and Grand Cayman with a group of friends, and we're going to do some charity projects while we're there as well. We're trying to figure out a school that we can work with to bring down some paper and notebooks and pencils and stickers and markers and all kinds of school supplies. So that's in the works. And then this summer, I'm going to a family reunion in Texas over Memorial Day. And I'm going down with my parents. We're going to do a American road trip. We're driving from Connecticut to Dallas, Texas. And we're going to stop at all the sites along the way, some of the national parks and Graceland and Dollywood and Memphis and Nashville. And I'm really excited about the international trip and the America trip. It's so cool to see things that's in your own backyard.
How can people contact you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, so I have an email address, sarahworldtraveler@yahoo.com. You can find me on Facebook. And I'm always happy to give people travel tips and information. I just think the world is such a small place and you never know why people's paths cross.
Sarah Winters Papsun, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and good luck with your future efforts.
Thanks, Paul.
Recorded January 23rd, 2014. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.